Okay, Battle of Gettysburg. This is going to be a very crucial battle in the Civil War, and it's really going to turn the tide in favor of the North for the most part, because it's going to be the second time that the South has made the decision to invade the North and come back unsuccessful. So we have to get to a little bit of paperwork first, so to speak. Who's the overall commander of Union forces right now after the loss at Chancellorsville? Joe Hooker. Very good. Well, after the loss at Chancellorsville, Lincoln was looking for another commander because Hooker resigned. He wasn't replaced, he resigned. He did not want to be overall commander of Union troops. Obviously, the Union wasn't doing very well. How many wins have the Union had so far in the Eastern Theater? How many wins? One, and that was at Antietam. They're having some success trying to control the Mississippi River, but they're having trouble getting Vicksburg. But at least they've had some victories, right? Well, in the Eastern Theater, it's been pretty sad. And it kind of got to the point where it's like inheriting the 0-36 football team that went 4 straight years without winning a game. Somebody isn't that interested in coaching that football team because of what's probably going to happen. And so Lincoln found himself in a situation where he couldn't find anybody who wanted to be overall commander of Union forces. Nobody really wanted the job. So on June 27th of 1863, June 27th of 1863, President Lincoln sends a personal message to the camp of Union General George Meade. And George Meade has his soldiers camped just a little bit outside Washington, D.C. And on June 27, 1863, President Lincoln sends Union General George Meade a personal message. Now this is kind of interesting because I'm not sure what Meade was up to. Not an overly decorated commander at the time. But when he got this message, he thought he was going to be relieved of duty. He thought he was going to be arrested for something. I don't know what he did, but he had evidently a guilty conscience, and he thought that he was going to be arrested and relieved of duty. That's what he thought was in this note. So I'm not sure what exactly he did that he thought that was going to be the case, but he thought he was going to be arrested and relieved of his duty. So he takes out the personal letter, reads it, and what's he find out, Carter? That he's just been named overall commander of Union forces in the Civil War. So thinking that he might be arrested and possibly relieved of duty, he is very shocked to find out that Lincoln has just appointed him overall commander of Union forces. Well, while Lincoln is doing this, Confederate General Robert E. Lee was marching his Confederate Army 75,000 strong toward Pennsylvania. So while Lincoln is changing commanders and trying to get things organized for Union troops, Confederate General Robert E. Lee is marching the Confederate Army 75,000 strong toward Pennsylvania. Now what Lee's strategy is he wants to win a decisive battle on northern soil. That's his goal. He wants to win a decisive battle on northern soil. And he really believes that if the Confederates go in and defeat the Union on northern soil in Pennsylvania, that it will destroy the Union's will to fight, and the Confederacy will have their own independent country. That's what Lee's banking on. We're going to go in and win this decisive battle on northern soil in Pennsylvania. The Union will lose their will to fight because they're won in whatever, right? They haven't won a battle, and the Confederacy will be able to have its own nation. That's his plan. Well, on June 28th of 1863, after getting his orders, so to speak, Meade leaves his camp near Washington, D.C., and marches approximately 100,000 Union soldiers into a collision course with Lee's Confederates. So on June 28th of 1863, after getting his orders, Union General George Meade will march from his camp in Washington, D.C., approximately 100,000 soldiers in a collision course with Lee's Confederate Army. And this all starts on July 1st, 1863. All starts on July 1st, 1863. Now the Battle of Gettysburg, just a precursor, is going to last 3 days. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of July. But it starts on the 1st of July, 1863. And it starts kind of by chance, because what happens is advanced troops from both the South and advanced troops from the North just happen to run into each other and begin what we call a skirmish, which is not a battle, it's a kind of a skirmish between lower numbers. What are advanced troops, Jonathan?
The group of soldiers ahead.
And what is their, yeah, very good. An advanced group, an advanced march are normally scouts, advanced troops, who get out in front of the main body to see what's going on. Well, it just so happened just out of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, just outside Gettysburg, these advanced troops from the north met up with these advanced troops from the south by chance, and they begin a skirmish, begin to fight. That makes sense? And that happens at 10:30 a.m. in the morning on July 1st, 1863. These northern advanced troops by chance run into the southern advanced troops, small number of men, and they begin to skirmish. Well, pretty soon reinforcements arrive from both sides, and the skirmish turns into a battle. And that starts about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So reinforcements arrive, and pretty soon this skirmish between advanced troops on both sides turns into a full-scale battle at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, in this first battle, the Confederate General Richard Ewell and his Confederate troops beat back the Union troops. So in this first battle at Gettysburg, which started as a skirmish and ended up in a battle, in this particular battle, Confederate General Richard Ewell and his Confederate troops have beaten back those Union forces. Now, what do I mean by they're beaten back? What are they doing? Retreating. Very good. So during this first battle at Gettysburg on July 1st, Confederate General Richard Ewell and his Confederate troops are beating back Union forces, and they are retreating, if you look at your map, in the area of Cemetery Ridge. That's where they're retreating to. So kind of get your map up and get an idea where they're going. Okay? Because all this whole thing is the 3-day battle, and we're going to lecture so you know where it's at. So these Union forces that are getting beaten back by General Ewell and the Confederate forces are retreating back up Cemetery Ridge. So they're going up a ridge to the high ground, right? Now, already on the high ground with Union troops is Union Lieutenant Frank Haskell. He's already on the top of Cemetery Ridge with Union troops. And I'll tell you why he was up there in a minute. But what does he see as he looks over the ridge? He sees a battle going on, right? And what does he see happening as a result of that battle? His troops retreating back up the ridge, trying to get to the high ground and join them, right? That's what he's seeing. And why is he up there? Because anytime you're in a battle, what do you want to get on? The high ground, absolutely. So they've kind of beaten the Confederates to the high ground at Cemetery Ridge. So again, during this first battle at Gettysburg, Confederate General Richard Ewell and his troops are beating back Union forces. These Union troops are now retreating through the town of Gettysburg toward a ridge known as Cemetery Ridge. And on Cemetery Ridge is Union Lieutenant Frank Haskell. And as those troops retreat up the ridge, what does Haskell do? Turns them and organizes them, because who's following them up the ridge? The Confederates, yes. So picture that in your mind. Union Lieutenant Frank Haskell, he's up on top of Cemetery Ridge. He sees these Union soldiers retreating up the ridge, and as they retreat up the ridge, he organizes them and turns them around to face the Confederate troops. They're advancing up Cemetery Ridge. So he orders his soldiers to fire back at the rebel advance. And what are they using for protection, and what are they resting their rifles on as they shoot back at the Confederates? That's right, very good. Headstones. So they're hiding behind thus the name Cemetery Ridge. They're hiding behind headstones, and they even had those that were made of crosses. And guess what they were doing with the crosses on the headstones? Resting their rifles on there to get a better shot. So picture that in your mind as the Confederates are advancing towards Cemetery Ridge. Lieutenant Frank Haskell orders his men to turn and fire back at the Confederate advance, and those Union soldiers turn around and use grave markers for protection and to rest their rifles as they fire upon the advancing rebel troops. Okay? At the same time this is happening, and again look at your map, General George Meade is placing all the Union soldiers along the high ground of the ridge, stretching from, look up here, Little Round Top, all the way past Cemetery Ridge to Culp's Hill. He is gaining all of the high ground on the ridges from Little Round Top past Cemetery Ridge all the way to Culp's Hill. He's going to gain a tactical advantage by having control of what? The high ground around Gettysburg. That's what you want. You want to control the battle, you want to be on the high ground. So at the same time that Haskell is fighting against Confederates at Cemetery Ridge, Union General George Meade is placing all of his Union forces across the long ridge that stretched from Little Round Top across to Cemetery Ridge all the way to nearby Culp's Hill. You all see that on your map and understand it, right? You know how long that line is of high ground? Almost 3 miles, more than 3 miles long is that high ground. And I'll tell you what, this will be a great tactical advantage, okay? Now, General Lee shows up, and he realizes that the Union has a tremendous tactical advantage against his troops because they hold the high ground. So he makes the decision to try and take Culp's Hill. So General Robert E. Lee surveys the situation. He sees that the Union has a huge tactical advantage by holding 3 miles of ridge line or high ground. And so he makes the decision that he will have his Confederate forces try to gain control of Culp's Hill. You can see that on your map. Why would he do that? What would he do, Mackenzie, see if you can figure this out here. What would he do as soon as he gained control of that hill? What's he going to do with it? What's that? Well, he might, but he's going to soften them up first. And how's he going to do that? How's he going to soften up those Union troops before he might send infantry? Yeah, that's right. They're going to pack cannons up there, and their goal is to get control of Culp's Hill and fire cannons all along the ridge to try to drive the Union off of that high ground. That's his goal. Okay? So at this point, General Lee makes the decision to take Culp's Hill from the Union, and he wants to gain possession of Culp's Hill so he can eventually set up rebel cannon fire at those Union positions along the ridge. So you remember General Ewell that got involved in that first battle, skirmish that turned into a battle? Lee orders him to take Culp's Hill, and this is what he says. Listen to this carefully. Quote, "Take that hill if practicable. I'll spell that for you. Take that hill, meaning Culp's Hill, if practicable. 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 Now, what would be another word for practicable? I mean, you would, we don't use it today. I'd say, go down, hey, Jonathan, go down to my office and feed my fish, if practicable. What do I mean by that?
Convenient.
Okay, if it's convenient or if it's possible, right? Well, what do you think Yule's response to that order was? I don't see that as being very practical. I don't see that being very convenient or possible. I've been fighting all day here with my men, and I just don't think that's going to happen. Well, the problem here is Lee gets really frustrated with Yule because that's not what Lee meant. He's a southern gentleman. Rather than say, hey, Jonathan, get your butt down there and feed my fish, will you? I say to you, hey, Jonathan, if practicable, would you go down and feed my fish? Well, you'd probably get it done, wouldn't you? Now, if you didn't want to do it, you might not. But the point is, Lee was a southern gentleman. He didn't order him rudely, but he expected him to do that. Well, basically, Yule makes the decision that taking Culp's Hill is not practicable. And that's not what Lee intended. And so the day ends, the first day, with the skirmish and the retreat and the thought process that they were going to take Culp's Hill. But Lee wanted it the first day. Does that make sense? So, we will move on to the second day of July 2nd of 1963, day 2 of the battle. And what's the first thing Confederate General Lee orders his army to do?
Yes.
Did I say 19?
Yeah, you said 19.
That's a trouble when you teach 3 different time periods in a day. So July 2nd, 1863, day 2 of the battle. What does Confederate General Lee ask his army to do? Take Culp's Hill. Okay? Well, approximately 4,700 Confederate soldiers arrive at the base of Culp's Hill, including Confederate soldier Wesley Culp. So on July 2nd, 1863, on day 2 of the battle, Confederate General Lee and his army will continue on the offensive. They'll try an assault of Culp's Hill. So he sends approximately 4,700 Confederate troops to the base of Culp's Hill, and among those Confederate troops is a soldier by the name of Wesley Culp. Luke Mortimer, why is that a little odd in your mind? I can tell. Yeah, that's kind of weird. Well, you know, Wesley Culp was born in Pennsylvania, but he moved to Virginia when he was just a small child, and now he's going to be fighting the Union to try to take his own family's land, because the land belonged to his uncle. That shows you the family versus family in the Civil War. So Wesley Culp is ordered to take a hill that belongs to his uncle. Okay? Well, this is kind of interesting because the Confederates outnumber the Union at Culp's Hill 3-1. You'd think that'd be a big advantage, right? What's the disadvantage for the Confederates? They're on the bottom and they're on the high ground. That's exactly right. So it'll hide the fact in a way that they're 3 times as many men short. So the Confederates are going to outnumber the Union here 3-1. Well, at the same time that the Confederates are beginning their assault on Culp's Hill, General Lee takes soldiers and attacks the southern Union line at Little Round Top. And it's on your map on the opposite side. So while Confederates are trying to take Culp's Hill, Lee will lead soldiers in an attack of Little Round Top. And in this particular battle, it's going to be even. There are going to be about 2,000 Confederates fighting about 2,000 Union soldiers. So it's going to be about an even battle at Little Round Top. Why does Lee want Little Round Top? Because if he gets them both, what can he do? Fire cannons from both sides into the Union lines. Well, the Union force wins at Little Round Top, and they end the battle with a final bayonet charge to defeat the Confederates on this day. What's a bayonet? Anybody know? It's a big long knife basically on the end of the gun, on the end of the rifle. So they quit shooting at each other and start having a big bayonet fight, which turns the tide in favor of the Union. So their attempt, there being the Confederates' attempt at Little Round Top, fails on day 2. Meanwhile, back at Culp's Hill, that fighting is incredibly savage as well, and that battle lasts almost until midnight, the night of July 2nd. And again, did the Confederates take Culp's Hill in the end? No. Okay? So at the end of the second day of battle, General Lee still has not taken either high ground of Culp's Hill or Little Round Top. Okay? Casualties on those first 2 days were pretty high. They estimated that there were about 25,000 casualties on both sides, which means they were either killed, wounded, or captured. 25,000 rebel and Union soldiers had either been killed, captured, or wounded. Approximately 14,000 on the Union side and approximately 11,000 on the Confederate side. So in those 2 days of fighting, the casualties were pretty high at both Culp's Hill, and Little Round Top, and the